Hey all, and welcome to my vlog. My name is Erin, and this is Demystifying Mythology with Kat. So Kat is one of my fabulous critique partners, and we've teamed up today to take you through this mythology series. Today we're going to be talking about world building in mythology, and this topic was requested by one of my patrons, Casey. All of her links will be down below. She wanted to know about mythology retellings in general, so I recruited Kat to help me out.
If you haven't already checked out the other videos in the series, there's going to be the links to those down below. You can also look forward to the upcoming two videos, Ancient versus Modern Morality, and Writing Mythological Romances. If you have other topics related to this that you'd like us to cover, you can leave those suggestions down in the comments and we'll take a look.
Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and ring that bell so you always know when a new video is uploaded, and I will have all of Kat's links in the description below. If you're not following her yet, get on it.
Building a world out of mythology can be really daunting, but it is extremely rewarding. First of all, a big chunk of your world building is going to be built around a few factors in your plot points. Are you creating a retelling that is based off of Viking Age Norse mythology? Your story is going to need to reflect the time period that it's based in. Is it an alternate universe retelling where Thor is the CEO of an electric company? Then you get to pick what that entails and what kind of mythological details you're going to include. Writing a story that takes place on a non-Earth plane of existence is also an option, like having Apollo taking off to Olympus all the time. That also gives you the freedom to make decisions about what kind of society they live in, whether it's something more ancient or more modern and slightly extra godly.
So at this point, we're assuming that you've settled on a time, location, and possibly an event for your story, and that you have a general idea or image of what direction you want to go in. Your first step here is, once again, research. You can't build anything if you don't know anything. We already have a super handy video about that. If you haven't watched our research video, that'll be in the description below.
As you're researching, I encourage you to use bookmarks and take notes of all the interesting little tidbits that you're finding. For example, when I was researching Norse mythology, I was looking into lots of different things surrounding the runes. Runes were a system of writing in Scandinavia, but they were also used only for small pieces of text like writing property of Eric on the inside of a helmet, and not for creating things like long bits of poetry or books. This already tells you a lot about how the Viking Age peoples communicated and about what kind of things you're going to need to build into that society. Information passed by word of mouth, no writing on scrolls, and lots of oral storytelling. Once you've compiled all of this information on how people lived and whatever else you think is cool, you can start deciding how to stitch these things together into your story. At this point, you have a balance to strike. You need to make sure that you're giving your readers enough information so they understand the story and the world that it's taking place in, but not so many details that you're overwhelming them with information that they don't need. And if you're giant mythology nerds like we are, you're probably going to want to drop in some Easter eggs for your in-the-know readers along the course of the book.
Does cosmology come into play in your story? If you're not familiar, cosmology is basically the origin of the universe, which are myths that show up in pretty much every world mythology. In the case of your story, the cosmology would be the beginning of the specific world that you're writing about. These usually involves myths with the earth, the sun, and the sky creating the world. You might also need to consider the origins of the specific pantheons. The original 6 of the Olympians were born to Titans, and 5 of them were swallowed alive by their father. Do those origins have an effect on your story? That absolutely affected my story because it put Zeus in a position of power over his other 5 siblings, even though he was the youngest. Your story might also focus on the creation of natural phenomena. By this I mean things like the origin of spring, why a desert is in the location it is, why mountains are shaped in a particular way, etc. There are often myths focused around these that could be really interesting to include. For example, if you're choosing to write about Hades and Persephone, you are absolutely going to be encountering the origins of spring. Worship.
If you're writing about the gods, how does worship come into play, if it does at all? Are the gods required to listen and respond to prayers? Does the amount of people worshiping them change their power at all? In some mythology retellings, the power of the gods depletes as modern world comes to worship them less and less. If you're writing about characters that worship the gods actively, how does that come into their day-to-day life? Are they super devout and offer daily devotions? Do they have an organized religion and practice within that, or are they doing things on their own? Do those practices differ from region to region? Do they only celebrate major holidays? Are they a layperson, or are they actively involved within the temples or churches? The life of an average Joe is going to probably be completely different than the life of someone who's actively involved in those organizations. Are the gods real in this world? Do the gods and their followers interact in a concrete way, or are the gods more of an abstract concept?
Has there been a transition in religions in the world that you're writing about? How does that influence the story? Was it long ago? Is it currently happening? Is it slated to happen in the near future? Shifts in religion are often a time of massive upheaval for people. Consider the Amarna period of Egypt when Akhenaten banned the traditional worship of the gods. He switched over worship to Aten, the sun disk. And after his death, pretty much every aspect of Egyptian society reverted right back to the way it was before he had taken power. It was impressive because he was ruler for like 30 some years. People were like, nope, it still sucks. If something like that is going to happen in your world, be sure that you tackle how it's going to affect your characters. There would be power shifts and structural changes across every aspect of life. Consider also the English Reformation when they were transitioning from Catholicism to Protestantism. The dissolution of the monasteries stripped away the priests and the nuns and the clergy. It got rid of people's homes. It dismantled their social safety nets because the monasteries had been taking care of the poor and the sick, and there was just nothing to fill this void. So if you want to write about a time of religious flux, it can absolutely be super interesting. But it's also very important to recognize how all-encompassing it would be because religion was a huge part of everyone's daily life. Tying mythology into historical events can also come into play. A lot of events were just explained away by gods, such as volcanoes or earthquakes. I used an example of this in Olympian Confessions, Hades and Persephone, specifically the destruction of the gold statue of Zeus at Olympia, which in history took place because of an earthquake, and in the story it's because of an altercation between Zeus and Hades. Other examples might be for a volcanic region where you would attribute those eruptions to Pele, or the Northern Lights appearing because of the Valkyries.
In a more vague sense, things like natural disasters were frequently attributed to the gods in general as an explanation for why that happened. In Norse myth, Loki is chained to a rock underground. Venom drips on his face, causing him extreme pain, which causes the ground to shake. Some sources have said that this could possibly have been a way to explain away any kinds of earthquakes or other seismic activity. And as well, Thor is like an explanation for thunder. Is there a hierarchy of gods in your world? What is that hierarchy and why does it exist the way it does? Does that influence your characters at all and how? This would be covering things like which is the top or most important god in your pantheon, and what is their descending order of importance both within the gods themselves and within their followers. For example, Zeus is the leader of the gods, but someone like Hades might be shown a lot of reverence because when you die, you go spend time with Hades, and you might not want him to be pissed off with you.
Are your human characters influenced by a hierarchy of church over state or within a religious organization? If you're writing about royalty, what is their role or relation to the local religion? Many royals were the head of a particular religion, or they had to balance their power with the ruling classes of that religious hierarchy. Like I mentioned before with the Amarna period, part of that transition was to destabilize the religious rulers. The goal was to transfer that power to the ruling family, who became the heads of the cult of Aten, and stripped away power from the priests of Amun, who had been previously running basically everything, almost on par with Pharaoh.
If there's no hierarchy at all, how do things work? Some religions allow for personal communications with gods, spirits, etc., and others have gatekeepers in order to facilitate that communication. If worship is appearing anywhere in your story, you should have an idea of how to present how that affects both the worshippers and the divine components of that relationship.
Creating a magic system within myth. A lot of fantasy readers love a good magic system. And while you don't have to create a full magic system, chances of magic showing up in a fantasy retelling are pretty high. Gods do have powers after all. You need to ask yourself how magic affects your plot and who has access to it. Is it reserved only for gods? Do humans have it? What about other mythological creatures, and in what ways would all of them use it? Once you understand the intentions of your system, you can begin to define it further.
Is it soft or hard magic? A hard magic system has specific rules and boundaries that the reader is made aware of, whereas soft magic, it just exists in the world and the reader is asked to suspend their disbelief. So how does that apply to what it is that you'd like to do? Are there explicit rules? Does magic have a cost? What limitations does it have? I also find it very interesting and compelling to link the magic system to details within the culture you're writing about. For my Norse myth retelling, I wanted to take some historical components and make sure that the magic system was bound to those. There are several different versions of Scandinavian magics, sometimes linked to household activities like weaving. There's also a long but often difficult to research history of magic within their cultures. I combine that with a couple of aspects of modern pagan practices as well, since they often use runes for things like divination, or creating rune-based drawings in order to provide things like protection. In fact, there was so much information that I wanted to stay true to that my original magic system ended up being confusing and a little murky. So I ended up trimming it down a lot, and you might have to do that as well.
Mythical creatures. Some mythical creatures can ride the line between creature and character. So first be careful about which belongs where. Minotaur can probably be classified under character and have some semblance of a personality, whereas something like a manticore may not fit under that same umbrella. I suggest pulling out those research skills and finding yourself a bestiary either of mythology in general or more focused around the specific mythology you're writing about. You'll have a collection of creatures to choose from, and then from there you can do more intensive research on each of the beasts that you've picked out.
Make sure that you're specific about your research about these beasts, because while lots of different cultures had dragon-like creatures, not all of them are going to be the same. Dragons in China, for example, look much different than the Greek Hydra or the Norse Nidhogg. You also have the flexibility to craft these creatures into characters. Maybe you want to give them a higher level of sentience and have them make a more specific impact on your story.
Mythological Easter eggs.
Some of you are going to want to be extra nerdy like us and include Easter eggs, extra little tidbits for your readers to find along the way. It's a fun activity, but how can you do that without confusing the readers that haven't got a background in mythology? Balance. Choose things that are noticeable, but don't divert the plot in any way. You don't want to be dropping tiny things that readers can take as a hint towards foreshadowing or other aspects of storytelling. For example, in Norse myth, there's a line where Odin says that he fears that his ravens, thought, and memory might fly away and someday not return, which of course is a reference to things like old age, your thoughts or memories not coming back to you. In my book, I choose to include this in a scene by having only one of the ravens present and Odin staring off into the distance, having completely forgotten what he was saying. A very literal version of world building is maps. In Norse myth, this is an absolute bitch because many of the different versions of the world tree and the 9 realms that you'll find out there are absolutely different. Some of them have 9 separate worlds connected by a tree, and others picture them as 9 interconnected planes, almost like you would see on a map of Europe. You're going to need to figure out what kind of physical layout your world has, especially if there's going to be any travel between realms or places. You should begin putting that on paper, trying to have a little sketch even for yourself. If it's not very pretty, that doesn't matter because you need to have a basic understanding of how those worlds are connected, how people get around, how the pieces of the world exist in relationship with each other, and that stands true no matter if you are working on a story the size of a village, a city, or 9 realms.
Greek mythology is also a delightful bitch when it comes to maps. Trying to figure out the exact layout of the underworld was not fun. There are multiple intersecting realms. Where would Hades put his castle? How do they move between them? Where would the Towers of Judgment go? How do you get everywhere, and who can actually access each portion? Often there are no exact answers for how any of these mythological worlds are laid out, and you kind of just have to use your best guesses. Figure out something that works for you and your story.
You may be able to get hints about the setup of the world from the original source texts themselves. Some will lay them out for you on a silver platter, and others will drop nuggets for you along the way. Some will tell you absolutely nothing. It's best to take notes when reading your source text about what kinds of landmarks exist in the world and where they are in relation to other things. You're very likely going to have to fill in the blanks and get super creative.
So that is all we've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Casey for requesting this topic. Links to her social media will be in the description below, and if you would like the chance to request a video topic, you can check out my Patreon. It's super fun. We have a little writing group, early access to content, requesting video topics, and the chance to have me help hash out your story. Thank you so much to Kat for joining me today. Kat, tell everyone where they can find you.
I have my own channel where I talk about the writing process and things like the psychology of book marketing. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram, both under the names cat_rector, and as said, those are all in the description. Sometimes I'm posting about writing, and other times I'm fangirling about books, games, and movies that I like, and you can always pop into the comments and chat with me.
Check out my books if you like fantasy or romance. You can read the first 3 chapters of all of them for free on my website. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. All our social media will be in the links below. Follow Kat for updates on the Goddess of Nothing at All. I will see you in the next video, and we will both see you in the next installment of Demystifying Mythology. Bye!